if you use technology, any form of technology, and even if it's just like a smartphone app or any kind of technology in your project today, you have to understand exponentials. And the simple reason for that is these technologies move on a much faster curve than your gut will tell you.
So we're going to use the first part of the worksheet here, projecting a trend. And you're basically going to find if there's a bit of tech that you could use for your idea and if it's exponential or not.
Now, it's really important to understand exponentials on a gut level, right? You just learned and seen that you cannot understand them really in your gut if you're not training your brain to do so. So what you need to understand is every time you encounter a technology and that technology moves on an exponential curve, figure out what the math behind it looks like. Let's do it.
Okay, so step one of this whole process is picking a technology that you can piggyback on an exponential growth curve. And this is really tricky because you can't really know if something is actually exponential until it's gone exponential. But we want to get on that exponential trend. We want to attach our idea to that trend now so that when it goes to the moon, we go with it. Now here's the weird bit. When this video is published, we're going to be out of date. So we're going to try and maintain a list of possibly exponential technologies you could hijack in the resources below. Some exponentials are really obvious because the media is hyped about it, like cryptocurrency or solar panels in 2018. But there are other exponentials that are not so obvious, like how cheaply you can get things into space, or precision medicine, or voice recognition.
You might use voice recognition software, something like Siri, Google Now, Microsoft's Cortana, or Amazon Alexa. And when you look at those technologies, they're kind of okay, they're not really great yet, and it's really hard to imagine when you just look at the status quo, like the today, how good will they be in the future? These technologies currently move on a curve which is roughly a doubling in terms of capacity and functionality every year. You take something like Siri. Siri is about 7 years old. The question for me becomes, if you want to integrate Siri into your product and you want to do something interesting around this, and a good example for this could be a mobile phone app you give to someone in rural Kenya to use voice to interact with your app. Right? So you look at Siri and you think about how good will Siri be in 7 years? Very often these technologies are fairly complex and they're actually a combination of different technologies. It's a little bit like Lego bricks which build a house, and what you're doing is you look at the house and then you break it down into the individual Lego bricks, what we call the first principles. So what you do is with Siri, you say, what is Siri actually today? It's basically three things. It's voice recognition, understanding what you say. It is cognition, understanding what you mean. And then it's a bunch of services it connects to and does interesting stuff with.
One thing, don't go too low level on your first principles, like physics exists, yes, and it underpins everything, correct. CPUs are getting faster and faster, correct. We want the level above. So for voice recognition, that might be how cheaply we can understand a minute of spoken word. For cryptocurrency, that might be how cheap is it to send an internet dollar overseas. You can safely ignore things that are just going to keep going, like physics existing, and instead focus on things that might change exponentially over time.
So you can go on Google and figure out how good is it today, what are the trajectories, what does this actually mean. You'll find all that stuff on Google, like Google is your friend here.
Now this Googling thing might take you 5 minutes or 5 days, depending on what exponential you're looking at. Really obvious ones like crypto and solar have heaps of charts that go up and to the right. However, you might have to dig into white papers and blogs and scientific research to find actual data. One trick I found works really well is you just go to Google image search, type in your exponential trend chart, a whole bunch of charts will appear. Find one that goes up and to the right, click it, and read stuff on the blog it was posted in. So let's look at our example in the template. We're doing voice recognition for surgeons, and we're starting with some of the numbers which we've looked up on Google. And here are some links to research that we've found that backs up the hypothesis. For example, this article about Google speech recognition, and that article has a chart, and we're really excited about charts with numbers that are going exponentially down or up. And we've got another article about skills, and I think we're going to use this one to make our own chart because that has a bunch of numbers in it that we can use. Now that we've found some data on the internet about an exponential line that goes up, the next step is to figure out the rest of that line. And for that, we do maths in a spreadsheet. So let's make the spreadsheet. Now this graph goes by quarters, so I'm just going to replicate that in our document and then keep going out to the right until the end of like 2020. And because this graph ends at Q2 2017, I'm going to throw a gap in just to show that we've got data we know on the left and data we don't know on the right. Cool. Now we're going to take the numbers from the graph that represent skills and just put the numbers in our own spreadsheet. Now let's figure out what the relative growth quarter by quarter is, i.e. how much it's changed. And this is really simple. It's just this quarter's number minus the previous quarter. And I can drag this across and check it makes sense. So 15,000 is 5,000 more than 10,000. Now I'm going to convert that increase into a percentage so that we can use it to project our numbers out. And this is simple. It's just the small number over the big number. And we'll make that a percentage. When we drag that out, we can see that it's increasing, but the percentage it's increasing over time is actually slowing down. We're going to start with the number from Q2 in 2017. We're going to multiply it by the percentage increase plus 1. We've put that in brackets so the maths works. This calculation means that we're increasing the previous number by the last percentage. Our relative growth is the difference between the two numbers. So we can see that the percentage continues to go down while the total skills continues to go up. Now we can grab this formula and drag it all the way over to Q4 2020. So we've taken the numbers we found in the article and used them to guess what the future might look like. Let's make a chart to see what it looks like. So we're going to select our data and insert a chart. So the problem with this chart is that it's linear. Exponential charts go up on a curve or sometimes an S shape. So to get that, I'm going to add in like a slowdown factor, which is another percentage we're going to throw into the mix. And we'll start with the data that we've got and then project it out slightly differently. Our factor is going to be 15%. Now I'm going to get all of the data that we know, and we're going to project it out again a little differently. This time, we're going to take the previous whole number, and again, we're going to times that by 1 plus the percentage change. We times this number by 1 plus the factor. So just to explain that, we've taken the whole number, we've increased it by the previous percentage, but then we've also changed that percentage by the factor. When we drag this out to the right, every single increment will be changed by the factor. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, these numbers are really confusing. To make it work, we're going to throw in another chart. The really important thing here to get your head around is that the numbers on the top are linear. They go up by the same amount each time. The numbers on the bottom go up exponentially. At every single increment, we increase the increment by a percentage, which we've called the factor. So let's play with that number a little bit. So our current chart is going up by an extra 15% at each increment. What if we make that 5%? It's starting to look more linear. What if we make it 25%? It starts to look really extreme. What we could do, however, is give it a negative percentage. And you can see it's starting to look like an S curve. It goes up and to the right and then curves off. So the last thing we're going to do is drag this out to like 20 years from now. So now we have two different views of the same numbers. And we can see over the long term, the line flattens out. If we make our factor less aggressive, it's a little more curvy. Last thing we'll do is put a link to the spreadsheet. So even if the maths of this was really confusing, I'm going to give you this example and another example in the resources below. But the important thing is you've actually done the math, because everyone underestimates where that line will end up.
Now, the really interesting question is, have you thought about this? Was this something you would have guessed? I can guarantee you, everyone I do this with, literally everyone, gets this wrong. Even for expert thinkers like Ray Kurzweil, who's like the god of exponential thinking, he will tell you gladly and publicly on stage that he has to sit down and do the math. So doing the math is crucial.
And lastly, we contextualize it. What does the world look like when the numbers get really big? So in our example of skills that Alexa can use, once the number gets to 100,000, Alexa will basically be able to do anything you can in your home for you.
And then it becomes really interesting, because now a lot of interactions we probably have today using our keyboard or touching stuff can now become voice activated. Think about an operating theater where a surgeon or a doctor can talk to Siri or a Siri-like system to get information. Imagine a world where in Africa someone is operating, and while they're with their patient, they can talk to a system which is connected to a vast database of medical information and can give them live medical information. So the world will change in pretty dramatic ways. So a really, really good example is a company called Nextleaf Analytics. They've got a couple of products. The one I want to focus on is a temperature sensor they use for vaccine fridges. About 20 to 30% of vaccines spoil because of a break in the cold chain. What this means is that the vaccine, which needs to be kept at a very specific temperature, because it's literally living organisms in there, gets either too cold or too warm. And then you administer a vaccine which is either ineffective, or in the worst cases, you administer a vaccine which makes a child, which is typically the recipient of these vaccinations, makes a child sick. So what the Nextleaf team did when I first met them, they thought about this problem. They looked at an exponential technology which was available to them when they started thinking about this problem, which is called the smartphone. What they could see is, by using the exponential thinking, by using the process of figuring out that these smartphones become twice as good at the same price point, which also means they become at the same performance level half the price, they could project into the future and see a world where the smartphone becomes cheap enough for them to actually deploy in masses. So this is technology merging with other technologies. So you take your Siri example, right? Like Siri understands what you're saying. It probably doesn't understand that what we're here using is subtext or slang or, our secret little language. And this is where it gets interesting, because Siri now converges with other technologies such as artificial intelligence. And an artificial intelligence system can learn what subtext, for example, means. So you could look at something like there's a dictionary, like your standard English dictionary, and then there's something called the Urban Dictionary, which you might have found on Google already. And when you start merging them, Siri can start to distinguish between, is the word you're just using a literal word coming out of the dictionary, or using subtext coming out of the Urban Dictionary. So technologies start to move and come together in what we call convergence.
The thing that I learned from this was that factor, that percentage, is super important. Because if it's really steep, we get to the future fast. If it's shallow, it takes a lot longer to get to the place where the numbers are kind of crazy. It's also really important to actually do the maths, because it lets you see kind of what order of magnitude the numbers end up in. It's really hard to think in numbers that get that big, but once you can see it on a line, you start to get an instinct for where we might end up.
So what I want you to do now is pick whatever technology you're fascinated about, which you want to leverage. Figure out where is it today. Then Google a little bit about what are the exponential trends, the curves which might underlie it, and then figure out where is this product in a couple years from now when you hit mass market scale. The more you do this, the more it becomes a gut feel, the more it becomes natural to you. Exponential thinking is accessible to everyone. Truly what you need is a computer and you need Google.